I'm Conor Friedersdorf, a staff writer at The Atlantic magazine.
And I am Phoebe Connelly, a senior editor at Yahoo News.
And we're going to be talking about a bunch of stuff today, but let's start with the controversy over Planned Parenthood and the breast cancer charity that cut off funding, or maybe that isn't exactly right. I guess they had been giving grants to get breast cancer screening done at Planned Parenthood, and they initially thought, well, we're not going to give these grants to Planned Parenthood anymore, and since they have reversed themselves. And what's the name of that charity?
It's the Susan G. Komen Foundation, which I think most people know because they are the pink charity, right? They have all of the pink branded merchandise, and
right.
They'll do partnerships with folks where you'll see like a pink version of Yoplait yogurt, and it's because the money is going to the Komen Foundation. So they're very well known.
Right. And so this is one of these fantastically successful cancer charities, I think the Lance Armstrong Live Strong bracelets are another good example of they managed to brand this in a way that got people giving, and they've done a lot for this cause over the years. And so we were both interested in this because social media played such a big role in the controversy. And I understand that Planned Parenthood sent out a tweet when this happened, when they announced that they'd no longer be giving them these grants, and that's how the sort of protest kicked off. Is that right?
Yes, but I also just think that a lot of female women activists who were online rallied around this. People who were already running tech-savvy campaigns on Twitter, etc., said this is unacceptable to us, and we're going to tweet about it. And also I think a lot of journalists who cover women's issues, who are also active social users, jumped on this. We did an analysis here at Yahoo of the tweets around it, and not only was Planned Parenthood one of the sort of main people sort of pushing the issue and the topic, but there were also journalists like Rebecca Traister, who's written on women's health issues quite extensively, and Jesse Gross, who's at Slate, another one, who were sort of putting out tweets and comments and retweeting issues and commentary around this.
Well, so it sounds like you have a better idea than I do of how this story sort of went mainstream. And so maybe you can answer this question, because it seems to me that there are, a ton of charities, a ton of nonprofit organizations out there in the United States that are always mixing up their partnerships and changing things. And I understand that, abortion is a hot button issue, and Planned Parenthood is connected to abortion. And so it's in a political space that is certainly highly visible and controversial. But still, if you would have told me before this happened that this decision would trigger, front page news stories and days of discussion on the internet, and that it would be everywhere, I would have personally been surprised. And so, what explains this? Why has it been? How have the people that follow this issue managed to make it sort of one of the leading stories in the nation?
Well, I think that to say that it sort of got keyed up just because it's about abortion is to misread, I think, the role that Planned Parenthood plays in a lot of women's lives. Right. It's something that people know because it's a place that you go and get your yearly annual exam. It's a place that you go for birth control if you use birth control. In smaller towns, a lot of times it is the only place that you can go and get healthcare, whatever that is. If it's your pap smear or if it's birth control, that's a place that you can go, and that will take you even if you don't have health insurance, which is a really big thing for a lot of women. So, right. Just the idea that this place that, yes, one of the services they offer in some locations is abortion, that was all they do, is just sort of to ignore this other role that I think it plays in women's lives. And it also, I think it was just sort of surprising because the Komen Foundation, there has been criticism previously about the types of campaigns they've run, or whether they sort of pinkwash this issue of breast cancer by just being about, it's about races, or it's about buying pink branded merchandise, when really it's about women's health. But just the idea that they would suddenly jump into a space that I think everyone acknowledges is a very touchy space, which is this whole idea of, turning it into an issue of abortion as opposed to focusing it on an issue of women's health was really surprising to people.
Right. I guess, my kind of thought about that is that I think you're right that Planned Parenthood enjoys such intense support because so many women rely on it for all sorts of things, and that it is for women who patronize it, rely on it for, checkups or all sorts of things that you do when you don't have health insurance. it's understandable that there's such intense loyalty to that cause. I think for its opponents, the issue for its opponents is a lot narrower, is focused on abortion. And it seems to me that giving money to Planned Parenthood, whether it ought to be or not, is just going to be an inherently controversial political act. I mean, I think that Planned Parenthood, in its own tweet to sort of kick off the backlash against the Corman Foundation, I think the way that they phrased it was that the foundation was caving to anti-choice activists who were pressuring it to disassociate from Planned Parenthood because of abortion. And, you know, I don't really have strong feelings about whether they should be giving grants to Planned Parenthood or not for breast cancer screening. I just don't know enough about it. Mm-hmm. But part of me does regret the fact that that there are these inherently political things that just become hot button issues beyond the question at hand, if that makes sense. That like,
well, it seemed to me that so many people jumped on the cause because they felt that that's what Komen did by withdrawing the grant, right? That they were turning something that was about breast cancer screening and making those available to women in existing women's health clinics that were already an infrastructure around the country, and turning it into an issue about other health services, not about the issue of breast cancer screening, or even the way they were doing breast cancer screening, or how they were allocating the funds, that it was about something totally, another service that Planned Parenthood offered.
Right. And am I correct that does the foundation acknowledge this, or do they still maintain that this wasn't about pressure from anti-abortion activists?
You know what? I actually pulled up the link this morning because I know the Washington Post did some great reporting about this. So hold on. I have the laptop in front of me here.
Excellent.
So I don't know the most recent stance that they have taken. That's actually a rundown. I think the Huffington Post, actually there was a reporter at the Huffington Post who had pulled up some internal emails that seemed to indicate that it was actually a decision that was made around their offering of abortion services.
Right.
But I will pull that up for you and you can refer to it.
Okay, yeah. And one thing that, I guess another thing that interests me about this is that much like the recent backlash against the SOPA legislation, it really kind of brings home the point that we're now in an era when social media savviness is going to have a great deal to do with who sort of wins these battles of different sorts, of who is able to sort of drive press coverage and who is able to get the other side in these disputes to sort of back down or reverse themselves or whatever. And I wonder, I've been trying to think through the implications of like, how is this going to change our media landscape? How is this going to change our politics? Because if you think of like the players right now who have a certain amount of currency, a certain amount of ability to like drive stories or to get their way, it seems like they aren't necessarily the same players who are like socially media savvy. And I wonder if there's any like predictable way that we can figure out
like who's socially savvy and who's developed that network. I mean, some of me says if you're curious to see how a battle is going to break out, you look to see, do they have a social media presence? Do they have a Twitter account? Does it look like they have someone on staff? Even if it's not that person's job, right? Do they have people who are part of their staff who are using social media in interesting ways? Are they using social media in interesting ways prior to, sort of a battle? But I guess I'm a little hesitant to say that it's that much of a change in landscape. I mean, I definitely think it's a different location, but at its heart, it's about recognizing what your grassroots tools are and using them. I'm sort of loath to be like, oh, it's so much different than when you would have people write into their congressman or do phone trees or what have you. I mean, ultimately, it's about getting people active and using the service. The technology is different, but the same sort of organizing force to me seems to be the same.
Well, yeah, in a way, I think you're right. I think that's ultimately how it'll shake out. I think in the near term, certainly, I guess if I could pick an entity that's sort of, or a class of people that are advantaged by this, right? It's companies like Wikipedia and Facebook and Google and all the big players who came out against SOPA and who used the fact that they're a sort of new conduit for communication to make a big statement.
Right.
And when I think of losers, right, it's people like my grandparents, one set of grandparents anyway, who are sort of afraid of the internet, who are intimidated by computers, who are afraid to be on the internet because they have this idea that even having a computer that's connected to the internet will somehow enable identity theft, right, even if they don't have any information on the computer, or who are just very wary of technology and aren't very savvy about using it, and still, get their news from the newspaper and from television and talk radio. And so it seems like, that generation ultimately is going to either, is going to both get older and die, and the new generation is more savvy, right?
Conor, are you worried about the mortality of your grandparents? This is a very sad turn for both of us. I mean, yes, different generations are going to get involved in politics in different ways,
right.
and I do think that the interesting thing is, yes, the life cycle of how these campaigns moves, it speeds up exponentially, right? So something like SOPA
right.
can develop and become a big story, a huge story very fast, or this Komen
right.
Foundation story, right? That if you look at the ways in which people are able to sort of tweet this and pass this on, and then it turns into something that gets shared on Facebook, which, maybe then your aunt is using it, right? Who may not be super
right.
computer savvy, but that message is getting to her, and then it then trickles
yeah.
down through networks in different ways. And, and what's also interesting to me is the ability to sort of marshal language that people understand and how you're saying this, right? That they're defunding them, or that this is a campaign with a known entity like Planned Parenthood that can successfully say, hey, this is a cause you should care about. You recognize the name, it's something that you're clicking through and becoming active in.
Right. And there was actually a link we'll put up on the sidebar. There's just a link that I saw via the Daily Dish of a breast cancer survivor who made this really powerful video essentially coming out against the foundation's decision to cut off funding, and was basically was making the case that breast cancer is not political, mm-hmm. and in a very powerful way. I guess our viewers can judge for themselves. But I think going forward, now that the foundation has reversed itself and is going to fund these things through Planned Parenthood again, I think one of the questions people are going to be talking about going forward is this woman right? Is it in fact the case that funding breast cancer exams isn't political, or is it the case that money is fungible and Planned Parenthood does politically controversial things, and therefore it is political? And I'm not quite sure who's going to win that argument, or if it's just going to go on forever, which is maybe more likely.
But in the short term, it seems like the real winner is the fact that women and people concerned with women's health, right, able to very quickly mobilize whatever you think about their position online mm-hmm. to make a statement, right? And that is interesting. Especially going into an election year, to see that constituency was very quickly mobilized around this issue.
Well, yeah, and it's so interesting to think of how something like this that wasn't at all obvious that this was going to happen, that it was going to play out in the way that it did, mm-hmm. and now you sort of have this self-conscious constituency that is going to probably be more united and able to do other things, and so who knows what those other things will be.
Well, and even to go back to your SOPA example, right? I don't think anyone was shocked that SOPA was good, or people around SOPA were good at organizing online, right? That mm-hmm. I would be shocked if they weren't. But I don't know that we would have naturally said, yes, people who support Planned Parenthood are going to come out in force if it is unfunded by something like the Komen Foundation. That, to me, was the interesting part of the story, was that this constituency was already online and very quickly mobilized when an issue they cared about came into the spotlight. Right,
yeah, absolutely right. Well, so this is maybe a good time to transition to talking about the various lady sites or lady blogs on the internet, as they're sometimes referred to. You sent me a link to an N+1 piece that was talking about these sites, and do you want to just sort of let people know what that essay was about before we start talking about it?
For sure. So it's in issue 13 of N+1, which is a great journal, and again, sort of the way that we share media now, I think it's really interesting, and this will keep coming up, I think, in the topics we talk about today. But I actually found out about this essay through Emily Gould, who is a former Gawker writer. She has a Tumblr, and she posted this article. So again, the way that we read print magazines is not always in print, but it critiques sort of the world of lady sites. So Jezebel, which is a Gawker property, The Hairpin, which is a lady site off of the All Network, Exo Jane, which is a new site of Jane Pratt. She was formerly of Jane Magazine and Sassy Magazine, and then Rookie Mag, which is Tabby Gevinson, so the teen fashion wonder, her site, which launched for teenage girls. And the sort of critique is like, the way that these sites handle the internet, discuss the internet, and discuss lady issues, the word lady is definitely critiqued in the essay. It's interesting to me, right, because I think like a lot of women in journalism, I followed the rise of these sites and certainly had problems with the way that they turn into kind of a lady ghetto, right, that women are encouraged to try out for these sites, or if you have an idea that, you should pitch to the women's vertical of a magazine or to the health vertical or to the beauty vertical. And, right, it's a tricky space, I think, for women particularly to navigate, both as readers of these sites and also as journalists who write on these issues.
Right. So, I mean, I think this is a really interesting topic, and I have read some of the lady sites more to follow particular writers than to follow the sites themselves. I think that most of the Gawker media sites are sites that tend to like build up in my Google Reader, and then I'm like, oh my God, there's 300 unread items. I just have to declare bankruptcy and move on. So I feel like I've missed a lot of like Jezebel conversations of late, just being busy with other things. But I follow Anne Friedman's career pretty closely and really enjoy her as a writer. And so I read her when she was at Feministing, and have been really glad to see her actually get a platform at Good Magazine, where she's now the editor and is no longer just writing on the quote unquote lady sites.
Although, wait, I think that's a different distinction, right? These sites are more like the internet equivalent of ladies' magazines, right? Which is the argument that Molly Fisher, we've sort of neglected her name here, the author of the N+1 article, she's really talking about these sort of women's sites, not sites that self-organize as being feminist sites.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
So I don't think, Anne, who is a former colleague of mine from The Prospect, I don't think that I would necessarily think of her as someone who has come up through the traditional, like, whether you call it women's magazines or whether you call it online women's magazines.
Yeah, no, I think that's certainly true. I guess what I was going to say, I guess the point I was trying to make is that I'm glad that the sensibility that was formerly being aired on Feministing, a site with a very particular audience, is now being aired more widely at Good, and is certainly not the sole focus. It's a general interest magazine. But that sensibility is kind of making its way into a broader publication and reaching people who might not have been exposed to it before. I tend to think that that's a good thing, and share the worry about the sort of ghettoization of lady sites. And
and they have proved to be a launchpad, right? Like Erin, I'm going to slaughter her last name. I think it's Carmen, who used to write for Jezebel. Who's writing, again, I've long admired, is now writing for Salon. So it has, and Anna Holmes now has a column for the Washington Post. I mean, I don't think that it has proved a platform to push these women elsewhere, as women's magazines have in the past for other female writers, right? So is there something problematic about having women's sites? Should we be concerned with the tone in which they write about anything?
Yeah, I don't know if I have really a strong take on that. It is interesting that this comes up over and over again, seemingly in every generation. There's an old Mary McCarthy essay that I was trying to reread, but couldn't find online before we talked, called "Up the Ladder from Charm to Vogue." I remember reading it at NYU in a class that Katie Roife teaches, and it was the same sort of critique of, here are all the women's magazines, and here is the conversation that they have, and is that conversation too narrow? Is there anything wrong with that conversation? One thing that I thought was new in this N+1 piece, the author made the case that one of the reasons that these sites are called, that the word lady is used so much on these sites, the author argued, is that there's a discomfort with using the word women. And I wondered that this had never occurred to me before. I don't know if it's right, but I wondered if you thought it was right. Like, what is your take on why the term "lady" has been so popular on these sites?
Yes, I will take the definitive. Why is "lady" so popular? Oh God, I have no idea. I mean, I certainly use "lady." I will say, I'm going out to drinks with my ladies. I mean, yes, you would take a better linguist than me to tell you how it has sort of crept back into the vernacular.
Right.
But Molly Fisher also sort of makes the point, right, that it's part of this tone of overt niceness that these sites have. And that, if you really get to the end, of the essay, she really finds problematic they're so interested in being nice all the time. But I guess my problem is I don't know that it's just women's sites that do that. I think a lot of sites try to be nice and easy to read and collegial and, whatever have you, wink, wink, and use a vernacular that they think their readers will understand and makes them feel like part of the family. I just don't know that women's sites are necessarily the only place that happens.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think, to make a sort of point beyond nice language, I think that women's sites and all sites that appeal to a particular demographic have this idea of group solidarity. And a lot of the fault lines, I think, and controversial things kind of happen around the space of like, well, does this thing or did this person or does this controversy somehow break the solidarity that we're supposed to have, whether it's as ladies or as progressives or as conservatives or as, you see the same things on sports sites, do
all the guys on sports sites call each other bro?
Well, they don't call each other bro, but there's definitely this, as Laker fans, we can say these certain things, right, about the team. We can be critical of the team, but we can't go too far. We can't say certain things because Lakers fans don't say those things. If you say these things, then you must be a troll or you must be an outsider trying to subvert this conversation. And to me, it's really fascinating to see, because I'm sort of not a part of the group that these sites are appealing to, the time when I feel like I get to sort of understand where the fault lines are or when there are these controversies. I mean, for example, Good a while back published an essay by Mac McClelland about PTSD and being a foreign reporter in Haiti, and there were some activists in Haiti that took offense at the piece and sort of wrote an open letter to Good. And although sort of international development was the ostensible controversy, it was also it was sort of two groups of women engaged in an argument that was taking place not entirely but largely on some of the lady sites, and Jezebel certainly covered it a lot. And it certainly it definitely had the intensity that you only have when you're worried about having an in-group and defining yourself as
I don't know about that. I feel like I have certainly followed controversies on, to kick the blog in a totally different direction, but on political sites that are largely dominated by men, both on the left and the right, that have appeared to me just as heated as anything around this essay, which I thought was fantastic. I mean, and I thought it started some really needed conversation about a topic that was very iffy. I mean, I think that's the other thing that you sort of have to bring in is that when you're going to open up a topic that is sensitive to anyone, I think the problem with women's sites or any of these pieces is just this idea that one essay or one site has to speak to all women, right? That you are going to you're going to write the essay about PTSD and sex, and it's just going to answer everyone's questions and speak to everyone's feelings. And that's obviously not the case, and yet somehow with women's work, perhaps because there are so few women's voices in the space, we still expect them to do that. And that's silly, right? That's obviously not going to be true. And I think hopefully it does open the door for us to talk about other types of difficult experiences, whether it's in reporting or being a woman, or Jessica Valenti published a beautiful piece today that actually I feel like maybe The Atlantic picked up, but I know it was on her Tumblr this morning, about her problems after she had her child, it was a very difficult childbirth, and her issues in the wake of that, and she wrote very honestly and emotionally about it. So is that women's writing, or is that just writing honestly about our experiences in life?
Right. Yeah, definitely. And so it's do you read any place where you feel like this publication does a good job of folding these sorts of issues and stories and writers into just sort of its main coverage?
You mean women's issues generally?
I don't know if I want to say women's issues so much as just stuff that they write about on the sites that we've been talking about. Because I think some of them some of them don't seem to me like they're just women's issues, that they only appeal to women. It seems to me that they're broader than that they're of interest to more people. And, I know that...
well, I think the way that happens to me, or the way that I've seen it happen in my career as a journalist and as someone who more closely reads the news, is when news organizations have a more gender representative staff. And to take that a point further, also a more racially diverse staff. I think that becomes naturally reflected in the coverage. You say something like, good publishing that essay by Mac. Well, I think Anne being the executive editor of that place and setting the tone and sorts of issues that she thinks are important for her magazine to cover becomes apparent.
Right. I think that's right. I mean, it's interesting to me because I think that... when I was an editor at Culture 11, I was certainly I was publishing a lot of women writers. I was the features editor, and I was looking for sort of longer features. And I'm generally attracted to essayists and to some of my favorite writers are anyone from like Mary McCarthy to Joan Didion to like Caitlin Flanagan. And I felt like it was very easy to find lots of really great stuff by women writers. I also was interested in, publishing political essays and political reportage and economic reportage and stuff like this. And the submissions that I was getting were like almost entirely by men on those subjects. And it was something that I only noticed sort of going back. It was so hectic and busy publishing things that I didn't have time to reflect on it a lot at the time. But like going back and looking at the stuff we published, that was certainly the case. And I saw an argument somewhere, I don't know where this is, but that basically made the case that the job opportunities available to women in journalism, the fact that there are so many, magazines like Vogue and Marie Claire and, sort of magazines that pay a good amount of money to a substantial number of women writers to write about like the kinds of things those magazines cover. Sort of that's part of what's going on, why you don't see more women competing in the political space.
Wait, that women's magazines are at fault for keeping women away from politics coverage because they're sucking up all the talent?
Well, I think it's just, I think the argument, and I don't know whether this is right or not, but the argument is that, you can get paid a lot more to go that route, and there are jobs that you're competing with like a smaller pool of people if you go that route. And going the other route, going the coming up through political journalism route is, at the beginning anyway, less prestigious and less highly paid. I would imagine, I don't know if this is true, but I would imagine that, people 5 or 6 years into their career who are working at like a small DC nonprofit political magazine or like a Hearst magazine, right? I would imagine the Hearst magazine people are making a lot more money. And surely that plays some role in where people decide to go with their careers. I
don't know. I think we could get into a little bit of a dead end here because I think we'd have to sit down with some stronger charts. But I don't necessarily think that it's fair to say that the existence of women's magazines is somehow keeping women away from doing political or broader cultural commentary. I mean, I think that that's about saying the people who are in power to make those assignments, consciously making the decision to reach out to women, to say, I want you to write this piece, to mentor them as they're coming up through the ranks, and to make sure that they have access. I mean, I think there's willing women to write political coverage, just as there's willing women to write, Cosmo's hot tips for making chocolate fondue. So.
Yeah, I certainly agree that there are willing women to do it, and there are very talented women to do it, and that they ought to get the opportunity to do so. But I don't know. I mean, in the same way, I think that, for example, sports coverage and the fact that so many men make their living, if all of the sports magazines disappeared, those men would be writing other things, and some of them would be politics, and some would be culture, and some would be, features for Outside Magazine. So I don't know. I would be interested in.
I would suspect though that if you took the world of political magazines and you looked, because some do pay, right? Some have paid internships and pay very well. I just don't know that would necessarily fix the gender imbalance that you see in certain areas.
Yeah, I don't know that it would fix it either. Yeah, I mean, my other thought on this topic, which I've never actually seen written about, maybe just because I haven't seen a good piece about it, but almost all of the women I know who started blogging when people started blogging and who have written political coverage just get sort of like insane emails and comments in a way that none of the men that I know do. I mean, with the possible exception of Andrew Sullivan, who gets sort of like, anti-gay emails sometimes and like terrible things written about him. But like for the most part, men just don't have to deal with like constant come-ons from readers, constant like sexual imagery and hate mail.
Well, it's so funny you bring this up because this actually happened to me just the other day.
Yeah.
It was very low grade. Trust me, I've worked with a lot of colleagues who have experienced some truly frightening things in terms of the kind of hate mail that they've received, the comments that they've received, the ways that people have tracked them down and found photos of them online. I mean, it's scary. It's like, and it's frightening. I think the thing that is the most problematic about it is that it's really easy to not pause and recognize how, like, just what a low-grade, horrible thing that is to have to deal with every day. To go through your inbox, to have the sexism and all this hatred just coming at you in a constant wave, right? It's fine to, like, laugh it off occasionally, but it just reaches this point where it's just like, oh, what is this? What is this happening to me? But I recently, and maybe we'll switch to this next, wrote a piece defending Pinterest, which is a social bookmarking service which allows you to share primarily images online. And I published the piece, and it had been tweeted out by a lot of people, and this gentleman on the internet picked it up and tweeted it out, but of course also had to add, and gosh, isn't she cute? To which, his friend and several other people were like, oh, yeah, super cute. And I was like, yeah, guys, I'm really glad that your commentary on my article, which has...
Right.
It is really about how hot I look in my headshot. Like, that's fantastic. And what's interesting to me is that I sort of responded back with a crack about how I didn't realize it was possible to catcall on the internet, but apparently it is. And several women who knew this gentleman picked it up and pointed it out to him. Mm-hmm. So this idea that it's unacceptable behavior, and everyone realizes it's unacceptable behavior, and yet still people feel comfortable not just doing it in a public space, but using my Twitter handle when making comments like that, so that it would be obvious that I would see them.
Yeah. And I think like real-world catcalling, online catcalling is something that most guys never think about or notice or realize is going on. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm always, talking to my sister or to my fiance. I'm like shocked by the number of times that they experience catcalling, because when I'm with them, it literally never happens, right?
Right.
Well,
it's an activity that generally is when women are perceived to be, like, on their own, or no one's going to notice that I'm doing this, or...
Right.
Yes, catcalling. It is a problem.
But yeah, so let's talk about Pinterest a little bit more. So
yes.
So for those who don't know, Pinterest is a social media site that's kind of geared towards sharing images more than text, sort of in the same way as Tumblr is. And if I have this right, I'm not a Pinterest user, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like you can one of the attractions of Pinterest is that, unlike Tumblr, you can sort of separate things that you're thinking about or sharing on different themes into sort of separate streams.
Yeah, but I'd say even more than that. I mean, Tumblr to me is a very lightweight blogging platform that marries in all these social functions like liking and retweeting. You can reblog a post, you can like someone else's post. But whereas Pinterest is much more of a bookmarking service. Okay. Where I've seen a lot of people compare the two, and to me they feel very different. When you start using Pinterest, you realize it's really just about saving an image in a place. And I think the comparison and the confusion comes in because Tumblr does have a lot of images and a very vibrant, visual community. But Pinterest is much more about sharing those images and sorting them, right? Because you can then sort them into, they're called boards, right? So you can have things I want to buy for my kitchen, and you can have people I admire who run marathons, right? With like inspirational people crossing the finish line. I don't know. I don't use it much myself, but from exploring the site, that's what it is. And what bothered me is I was trying to understand the service because I do a lot of social work at Yahoo, and I wanted to know, what is the service? Why would people use it? And when I was trying to read up on critiques of the service or people talking about how they did or did not use the service, a lot of people would just sort of slough it off as being like, it's all wedding photos. It's all girls sharing cute dresses. I'm so over it. And if you look at the homepage of the service, I mean, there are a lot of these sort of ladies sharing hot ways to French braid your hair or what have you, but that's not a reason to hate the service. Like, it's not enough to just say, I'm so tired of ladies and the things they share. There we go, I'm using ladies. And then that is a reason to dismiss the service. If you use the service and you find it unusable, that's a really valid critique. Or if you don't like the community that has gotten on there, you can say, well, that's not my community. But you can't start critiquing the service just because of who's using it or what they're choosing to share on the service.
Right. And yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that mystifies me about the internet is like the things that people decide to get upset about and to like critique, like, all right, there's a social network out there that you're not using and you don't like, and like, why do you want to mock this thing? I don't know. I think that there are also it's also just going to be the case that social media keeps segmenting, and there are these little universes, some of which are considered sort of cutting edge and cool, and some of which are considered the equivalent of still having an AOL email address, right? Or
a Yahoo email address.
I don't think that's as bad as I think the Yahoo email address is still okay.
I'd hope so. I mean, I have one, so
But yes, so Pinterest. So who are the critics of Pinterest? Why are they? Do you have a sense of why they are angry? Why they are? They appear to be
the young men of the internet who are bored with these types of content and these topics. I mean, the critique that I sort of called out was this site called I Love Charts, which is a Tumblr that I follow. And they had posted a pie chart sort of being like, well, here's who uses Pinterest, right? It's like, and it was like women who are planning their wedding, women who wish they were still planning their wedding, and then the men's slice was very small. So I went through, I was like, okay, well, who are these people mocking it? And of course it was two young white men. And I was just like, I'm so bored by this. Like, there has to be more. And I had put out on Twitter several weeks before, I'd said, why use this service, hoping that I would get some responses. And I got some actually very thoughtful responses back from people who, were using the service and really liked the service and liked what it allowed them to save. And, even from women, I got some back that was just like, oh, cannot figure out this community, like, not my community. So I don't know. I'd like us to see us talk about social networks much more in terms of who they attract or the communities they do allow to sprout up, as opposed to just sort of.
Yeah, I guess I would say that there are all sorts of social networks that would bore me to tears that I want to exist out there for people who happen to be interested in all the things that would bore me to tears. Which are like a lot of things, and I just don't. I mean, these guys who are frustrated with this content, this is a thing I fundamentally don't understand about the internet, because, I see it sometimes in comments on articles that I read, or even things that I write sometimes, where well, why are you writing about this thing? It's so boring. Well, like, okay, that you're perfectly entitled to think that. Maybe it is even objectively boring. So, like, read something else. We're not in the days where you have three networks to choose from, right? And you should, like, write the director of programming when you're bored by the thing you have to watch at 8 p.m. every night. There's just infinite stuff out there. And if you're bored by something, it's just, like, very easy to skip it.
Yes.
So I guess this chart that was mocking Pinterest sort of suggested that something like 80% of its users were using it to plan their weddings.
Yes.
And this is a subject of interest to me because I happen to be planning a wedding with my fiancée.
Congratulations.
And thank you. And I have to say, I've always been a critic of the wedding industrial complex, and this has only deepened my terrible feelings toward it.
I am not planning a wedding, so I am anxious to ask you many questions about this and hear all of the received wisdom for some future date when I may or may not choose to plan a wedding.
I think that the way I look at it, I remember a long time ago I saw a documentary about wedding traditions in different countries, and it there were a lot of touching little things that I never would have thought of. Some family traditions, some religious traditions, some ethnic traditions, and as far as I can tell, the tradition in the United States isn't that everyone, throws a meal on the tribal common for the wedding party, or that they, pool the family's resources, or that they, whatever the things these people in different cultures do. In our culture, it seems to be that when you're getting married, people are like, okay, that's going to be 40% more.
So have you taken to just lying about it? Just being like, so I'm planning a huge party to celebrate the 20th of July. It's just a huge thing for me. Just really into the 20th of July. I don't know. Actually,
I mean, we've certainly thought about it. I mean, because you want, at least my fiance and I, want to sort of thwart the wedding industrial complex, right? We are of the opinion that it is just sort of a racket.
So what are your give us your top 3 hints that you've discovered so far? What are your best workarounds that you've found?
Well, so I've written for a long time about diamonds. There's this article in the Atlantic that is
the classic,
one of our most trafficked articles ever, about how De Beers sort of created a racket around diamonds. And I have both sort of it's a racket kind of objections, and also sort of blood diamond sort of objections.
Well, and also just the idea that jewelry has been marketed. I wrote actually a big paper about this when I was in college, but Tiffany's practice of buying the A3, the upper right-hand corner ad in the New York Times, and the way they sort of sell this idea, and they have for years, it's been going on for decades, this idea that, jewelry and gold equals love, that's your display of affection.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, there are people out there whose thing is that they like jewelry, right? Mm-hmm. They like the aesthetics of jewelry, they like the aesthetics of certain stones, and I think that's perfectly fine and awesome, and those people should buy diamonds if that's the stone that they like.
Yes.
They should make an effort to get a diamond that isn't a conflict diamond, but, I have no problem with them buying diamonds. But, the idea that everyone in the world prefers to spend, this amount of money, and the thing that they want to spend it on is a diamond instead of a trip to Italy or a violin or whatever thing that people might want to spend money on. Some people love painting. Wouldn't it make sense to get an engagement painting? I don't know.
So did you guys exchange rings for your engagement?
Well, so Courtney, fortunately for me, is of a similar mind about diamonds than I am, and she is, she is a very economic-minded thinker, meaning not just that she's thirsty. That's not what I mean to say. But what I mean to say is that she sees the opportunity costs of things and reads economics blogs for fun. And the idea of the wedding industrial complex sort of the economist in her rebels against it, I would say. But so anyway, we did like the idea of rings, though, and we went to a few different ring shops. We got engaged in Spain. We went to a few different ring shops, and the experience was kind of like a used car dealer kind of experience, where the person was like clearly trying to play on your insecurities. And we were kind of immune to it because we didn't have like diamond-oriented insecurities.
Diamond-oriented insecurities is...
But which people do have, right? Because there are some people who go into work, right? And even if they don't care about diamonds, their
someone's going to
coworkers
ask you,
be like, oh, what, he doesn't love you enough to get you a bigger diamond than that? Or like, or, it's more passive-aggressive than that. It's like, I guess
that's such a
nice.
charming ring.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So anyway, we were up in Northern California in a place called Santa Rosa, and we happened to stumble into this like corner jewelry store, and this guy came out with like dirty hands and this like one of those things that you look at rings through. I don't even know the name of it. He was like a character out of a John Steinbeck novel, just like a small town, Northern California craftsman.
The lost John Steinbeck novel about the diamond seller.
So it turns out that he made rings and was like. So another thing about diamonds and other stones is that when you don't get a diamond, if you get like a sapphire or a ruby or an emerald or whatever, most of the ones that are available are like huge because they assume that you're compensating for not having a diamond, and so you want like a gigantic stone. And Courtney thought that they looked kind of gaudy and wanted something that was that was more to her taste and whatever. And so a lot of people told us you have to look in antique stores for this, you have to look at antique markets or whatever. But this guy was able to make a ring, and he like custom made it, and we got a sapphire, a blue sapphire, and she loved it because I don't have like highly developed aesthetic tastes about jewelry, and I think everyone wants to have the feeling that this is like a meaningful thing, and nothing was going to be meaningful to me that we just like picked out together because it didn't. I don't like no jewelry design appeals to me, but like we got to kind of draw it and design it, and so it was like more emotionally meaningful. And she loves the sapphire, she loves the blue of it. It was like the right size for her. So this is my first piece of advice: is like if diamonds is your thing, then awesome, get a diamond. But it doesn't have to be your thing, and you could get something that's like both cheaper and really cooler. That's like perfectly to your taste. And thwart the wedding industrial complex, which is also important.
Well, and Conor, I will chime in since you cannot actually see me, since as we discussed before starting this, we're not sharing screens right now. But I am actually wearing several rings right now, and they are all secondhand. And my favorite of which I actually bought at a junk shop for I think $15. So it looks much fancier than it is, and the diamonds are paste and not real. So yes, buy secondhand. They're great. They're gorgeous.
Yeah. Definitely, and read this Atlantic article, which we'll also put about diamonds.
All right, so we've got number one. Let's get number 2 and 3 for all of the wedding planners out there.
Well, so I guess number 2 would just be an appeal to people who know people who are planning weddings, which is this. I mean, the whole process hasn't actually been nearly as hard on me as it's been on my fiance, because people don't really expect me to have any strong opinions about anything about the wedding. But they expect her to have strong opinions, and not only that, they have strong opinions, and they want her strong opinions to be the same as their strong opinions. And
and they also probably just want to be constant. Like they expect that is a topic of conversation they can open up with her, and that she will be ready to jump into with them.
Right, and that the thing that she's most interested in the world is planning a wedding right now.
Right.
Which just like isn't her personality and isn't a lot of people's personalities. And, of course it's understandable that, for your family members, for example, a wedding is something that means something to your parents or your siblings. And of course they're going to have thoughts and opinions. But like talking about like total strangers having opinions about, what are your colors? Or are you going to have napkin rings? Or
what are your colors, Conor?
We don't have colors because.
Can't you just declare some right now on Blogging Heads?
I can't because
I'm just giving you a hard time. It's totally fine, obviously.
But no, this is what happens, right? People want you to have, and they're shocked if you don't have colors. They're not shocked if I don't have colors. They're shocked if she doesn't have colors because, what is it? What do you mean you don't have colors? So yeah, I would just say, if I were to write a wedding etiquette book, a new wedding etiquette book.
Say, if you have questions about colors, call Pantone, not my wife.
Yeah, just like people want to do what they want to do, and it's their wedding, and you should sort of let them do that.
Agreed.
And then the last thing is wedding venues, and we're both into sort of good food and craft cocktails. We both like a good cocktail. And so the thing that was important to us, we wanted to have a wedding that was outside, and we also wanted to have good food and drink. This is very difficult to find because most places want you to buy into their sort of, we're going to give you overpriced chicken cordon bleu kind of banquet style thing where they provide all the food and alcohol, and the only alcohol available is bad gin and tonics and domestic beer or whatever they have. But this is another thing where I feel like the sort of public policy oriented person in me just wants to point out that this would all be a lot better if we didn't have such an insane attitude toward insurance in our culture. The idea that, if I wanted to have...
How do we go from bad gin and tonics to insurance?
Well, here's how we do it. Because, first of all, if you want to get a bartender at a wedding, right, most venues will require that this person have an insane amount of insurance in case one of your guests gets too drunk and then gets in a drunk driving accident and kills a family of 8 in a van, and then it's billions of dollars in legal fees. So for bartenders, the whole liquor license thing is just ridiculous in and of itself. And we've just built a system of serving alcohol that doesn't put the onus of responsibility on the person drinking it, but on the person serving it.
Mm-hmm.
And also, wedding venues require you to take out it seems to me that you should be able to just rent out someone's backyard or a park or whatever. And if someone gets hurt at your wedding,
but I think you can just get married. Right? I think you could probably, well, I don't know where you live in California, but you could probably just invite people over to your house and do a small ceremony in the backyard and have a friend bartend, right? That wouldn't require you to take on insurance.
It's true. If you're willing to have, a small enough wedding, and even then, right, you could be strictly liable for things, right? If it were at my parents' house, my mom would probably be oh, you should totally get insurance because she tends to think of these sorts of things and is paranoid about this kind of thing, and maybe for good reason. Totally people that get sued for having parties at their own house.
Oh my God, Connor, you're cementing with every second that if I ever get married, I'm just going to run off to City Hall.
Well, this is another way to thwart the wedding industrial complex. And if you were to do that, I would support you totally, and I would celebrate your preference. And if lobbying were required to somehow ease regulatory burden so that you were able to enact your preference, I would also be with you there. So you can count on me.
All right. So when I decide to run off to City Hall, I can call you and you can lobby for me while I get
exactly.
I
I'll be
Love it.
Yes. Unlike Newt Gingrich, I will be a registered lobbyist for this cause. I believe in it so much.
Well, speaking of alcohol, I think we should turn to our final topic. A woman who indeed sings about alcohol.
Ah, very good.
Like that transition?
I like it.
Okay, and that would be Lana Del Rey.
Yes, Lana Del Rey.
Which
internet sensation turned internet object of ire.
Yes. And I think it's the second to last track on the album. She calls out Pabst Blue Ribbon on Ice, which I haven't heard anyone since my uncles in Kenosha call it Pabst Blue Ribbon. I think everyone now calls it PBR.
Yes, where hipsters and Charles Murray's "How Thick Is Your Bubble" quiz meet. So,
have you heard her album?
I in preparation, I've listened to a few tracks on her album, and well, I guess once again I'm mystified by people getting angry at things on the internet, because part of this, right, is that people are very angry at Lana Del Rey because they think that she is contrived and fake.
Well, and to be fair, not just on the internet. She did perform on Saturday Night Live, and many people were displeased, including Brian Williams.
Right. So can you once again serve as intermediary between me and angry people? Why are people angry at Lana Del Rey?
Why are people angry at Lana Del Rey? I mean, some of the churn I feel has occurred on this sort of world of music blogs that I jump in and out of, but don't spend much of my time on, where people have all these sort of questions about her origin story, not in the least because there are videos of her performing under her birth name, Lizzie Grant, before she decided to take on the stage name of Lana Del Rey. So this idea that somehow she was just trying on too many personalities in her quest for fame. This sort of backlash about whether she was actually behind her own rise or whether she's just this created star, which I find a little puzzling, right? Because many stars are created and that doesn't change how much we enjoy their pop tunes.
Right.
And then I think sort of the not pitch perfect SNL performance was the nail in the coffin.
Right. I don't know. From the tracks that I've listened to, I wouldn't buy Lana Del Rey's album. But reading the review of it in the New York Times, what interested me was that. So I guess the background story is that she released one video called "Video Games" on the internet a year ago or something like that, and it sort of tore up the internet and did very well. Was very well received. And now her album has more recently come out, and it's not been well received. And what's happened between the release of that video and the release of her album was this sort of big fight about whether she's authentic. And I was fascinated by the extent that the New York Times the New York Times review, the review was focused around that fight. The review was not, I'm going to listen to this album and I'm going to tell you whether it's good or not. The review was like, I'm going to rehash this fight and it's going to be the whole frame through which I see this album.
Which for a lot of casual music listeners, I think is suddenly, without having ever heard her music, they're just hearing that there's a huge fight about her.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. And that is really interesting to me because the internet is bringing about, on every topic, right, there are insiders who follow something very intensely, and there are non-insiders who are ultimately interested in what music is coming out, what movies are coming out, who's running for president, things like this. And there's been this whole conversation that's been going on, and journalists at different outlets are in different positions, right? So if you're at Pitchfork and everyone that is reading you follows this intensely, it seems like maybe that New York Times review would make sense. But to me, for the New York Times, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense for the average New York Times reader. I think the incentives do push the average New York Times writer to want to write the insider piece because they want to be seen as being at the cutting edge of the beat that they write on. They've certainly been following all these conversations and maybe lose sight that everyone hasn't. And that's my judgment about what the New York Times should write, but maybe I'm wrong. Like, it's very hard to decide where.
Well, I think there's a happy medium, which is actually the piece that will also go up on the sidebar here, which is this piece that Jessica Hopper, who I like and have actually worked with before, wrote for Spin Magazine, which also sort of delved into all of the back controversy, but Jessica also did all of these interviews with people who had worked with Lana Del Rey and really unpacked that process of making an album and making a persona for yourself, which I think is a much more fascinating take on this, which is to say, you know, the reason why people who are interested in music got so involved in this story is because there is a backstory here, right? That being an artist involves you figuring out what your sound is like and how you put together an album and what you know, whether you go with a small label or whether you are lucky enough, you know, because it's not always a choice to get picked up by a larger label. and what decisions go along with all of that, right? And Jessica Hopper makes this very compelling case, I think, that this was a choice that Lana Del Rey or Lizzie Grant made all along, right? That she was constructing a personality that she wanted to inhabit as a singer, and that's the album that we have. And you can debate whether or not you like it or whether it's totally ridiculous, but that you have to sort of, that's part of the craft, and to knock her for that is to ignore the fact that that's how music is made.
Right, and yeah, I guess the difference between now and always is that the early stages of someone's career are more visible, and I don't see that going away. I mean, it's kind of actually more interesting. I mean, who is it? I think it's Sarah Ferguson from what group is Sarah Ferguson in? I'm blanking on this. So she's in this sort of like hip hop super group, Black Eyed Peas.
Fergie.
Yeah.
Yes.
So she was on Kids Incorporated, the Disney sing-along show as a kid, and this has been to some amusement to some people on the internet. But I bet surely this kind of thing is going to happen more and more, where by the time Jim Morrison came to the attention of a national audience, he was already Jim Morrison, and he sort of chosen this persona and in a way became it. It's like this image you craft of yourself, right? Jimmy Buffett wasn't born a
he wasn't born with a margarita in his hand, unfortunately.
Exactly. He wasn't born with a margarita in his hand. He wasn't born flying a seaplane and hopping from island to island. But, he chose that persona long ago, and after he chose the persona, right, he sort of became that persona. It sort of, if you're successful enough and you're inhabiting this persona all the time, you do sort of come to take it on, I think. But I fear that what's going to happen now is that now artists are going to start doing this like much younger. If someone is like 13 and they want to be a pop star one day, they're going to start like crafting their Facebook posts and curating their Tumblr like with this in mind.
I don't know. I mean, but whatever. That's the rise of Britney Spears. I mean, it's not like we haven't been grooming, child stars. You can go back to Shirley Temple. Like this whole like star factory and this idea that someone has to have this carefully crafted image is nothing new. The idea that someone, particularly a woman in this case, could have a hand in that, right? Could sort of be part of choosing how her image comes out and making this artifice is, to me, what it seems like people are uncomfortable with Lana Del Rey.
Well, no, I think what's new is actually the opposite. The idea that you should have authenticity is what's new, and that. I mean, to the extent I can understand the backlash against Lana Del Rey, I guess it goes something like that she is lying. It's not that she's inauthentic; it's that she's lying about being authentic, right?
Right. That's right.
And I don't know. I guess I just I'm of the mind that the problem is valuing authenticity in the first place in music, because but lots of things are pushing us to do so. Like American Idol, right, seems like a driving force in our sort of pop musical culture to value authenticity. Everything is built around these storylines and like.
I have never watched American Idol. I'm afraid you're losing your debating partner here.
It's all right. But well, for those of you who have one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Sorry, letting you down. Totally letting you down.
No problem.
All right, so but of the Lana Del Rey tracks that you listened to, you were like, probably wouldn't buy it.
Yeah, not my thing. Definitely wouldn't buy it.
Okay. I think it's kind of a great summer album jam, like a early evening, getting ready, hanging out on the stoop, drinking.
Yeah.
Pabst Blue Ribbon. What have you?
Yeah, if it was on, I wouldn't be averse to it. But I tend to consume music by like delving deep into people's catalogs at a pace that is just like totally disconnected from the larger culture. So
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, I would, if since we're doing music recommendations, another female artist who has an album coming out is Sharon Van Etten, and it's fantastic. So you should check that out. Not nearly as much controversy around her.
I will do it even if she is totally inauthentic.
Okay.
All right. Well, we should probably wrap up. We've gone the allotted time, but good talking. I hope we do it again sometime. And
Absolutely.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Connor.